Now we're going to talk a little 76ers because, again, Joel Embiid. Again, Joel Embiid, a guy who I think is, again, not getting enough credit. And I don't think it's direct. I don't think it's direct. What I think it is we're just so infatuated in this football town. And right now, before I bring the guest on, Sixer stats posted. Joel Embiid posts 31, 15, and 10 in 31 minutes and 27 seconds of playing time tonight. That had the only player ever to post at least 30, 15, and 10 in fewer minutes played was also Joel Embiid. 31, 15, 10, and 29, 47 on 1-3-22, almost a year to the date against Houston. Amazing. Absolutely, absolutely amazing. And again, we're going to bring in the real Mike KB on right now. He's live on the line. And when he's ready, he's going to come on. Mike, if you want to unmute your microphone. And Mike, what's up, buddy? How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, man. Thanks again for taking the time out for me and the audience. Again, this is Michael KB at the real Mike KB, 97.3 ESPN. You see him up there on the screen right there. Make sure you go follow him. I'm telling you right now, you will not be disappointed every single day, whether it's a Sixers game, whether it's post-game, whether it's pre-game. The man is all over it. And Mike, I just talked about Joel Embiid, about that stat. I know you heard me, and I know you know it. And I got to ask you because I feel like indirectly, this dude is having such a historic season right now, and we're not even paying attention in Philadelphia enough because we're so infatuated with the Eagles.
Yeah, man, you're absolutely right, and I think it's two-pronged. Obviously, part of it is the infatuation with the Eagles. Football is always going to be number one in this town. A lot to talk about with that team. But part of it, I think, is the Sixers fan base, too, just being a little bit jaded. And understandably so, and that's not to take away from anything that Joel is doing, but I think a big portion of the fan base is just kind of at that point, like, let me know when it happens in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like, let me know when this happens in the postseason. We've seen the regular season dominance, year in, year out. The fact that Joel's been able to take his game to another level this year after, winning the MVP award last year, I think is really impressive. And I think, as the season wears on, NFL season wears down and playoffs start to approach, I think more people, both obviously locally and nationally, will start to pay attention to the Sixers and will start to pay attention to, what Joel is doing. Because night in, night out, we're seeing him play the best basketball of his career. And like you said in the lead in here, it's not only the best of his career, it's some of the best that we've seen from a center, in the history of the NBA. He's doing stuff that hasn't been seen since the days of Wilt, since the days of Kareem, so it really is impressive what he's been able to do. And I do agree that I think it is going a little bit kind of under the radar, both locally and even on a national level too.
Yeah, it's a great point, man. Even on a national level, and for someone, we went through every year, right, until we finally won the MVP. About is it Jokic, is it Embiid, is it Jokic, is it Embiid? And I, for one, I went back and said, listen, I watched that championship run, and I said I downplayed Jokic. I didn't think he was that good. Like, I not saying he was that good, but I thought they were really elevating him to a level that I didn't think he was worthy of until I watched it. And I was like, wow, this dude is really good. But now, what has changed in your opinion? Yeah, we're live on the line right now with Michael KB at the real Mike KB of 97.3 ESPN. In the comments, you will see his author page, his bio page. Click on it, check him out so you are infatuated with his work like I am. And what changes here, Mike? I mean, obviously Nick Nurse comes in, and from my eyes, and I want to hear from you, but from my eyes, he's not stagnant anymore. There's so much ball movement that there wasn't in the Doc Rivers system, and I feel like now he has more freedom, and he's almost resting while he's playing because he's only playing like 30 minutes a game.
Yeah, Tony, that's a great point. He's doing a good job of, load managing himself just by being so dominant early on in the game and in the minutes that he is playing, scoring, more points than minutes played per game or throughout the season, which is crazy. And I think you nailed the main thing. Obviously, some of it is scheme related for sure. And this Sixers offense, there is absolutely a lot more motion and a lot more secondary motion. So, there'll be the primary action, whatever's happening with the ball. But then when Joel has the ball instead of a lot of guys just standing around on the perimeter and kind of watching. You're seeing a lot of that, back screens, basket cuts, things of that nature that you didn't see quite as much during, either the Doc Rivers or the Brett Brown era. And then part of it too is personnel and roster related. The past season and a half with James Harden here, by default, a lot of the offense was going to be James Harden-esque. It was going to feature either, isolations for James Harden or two-man game pick and roll situations with him and Joel. And that kind of takes away, the opportunities and leads to kind of some of that standing around and just kind of ball watching that you saw a lot over the past couple seasons under Doc Rivers. So I think it's a combination of, now that Harden's gone, you have a little bit more explosive, dynamic, quicker guard, obviously, in Maxey, and then Nick Nurse coming in and putting in an offense that is more motion-based and more secondary action-based. And I think the combination of that, plus Joel has just taken his passing to another level this season. I definitely think you were talking about Jokic leading in. I think that Joel is motivated by watching Jokic. Obviously, Jokic won the 2 MVPs first, then Joel got his. Now last year, Jokic won the championship, the MVP Finals award. Now it's, Joel kind of watching that, being like, man, that has to be me next. And I think both of them, they feed off of each other. And I think seeing how good of a passer and how much Jokic is able to get all of his guys involved and how that benefited Denver, in that championship run last year, I think Joel has emulated some of that and seen hey, spreading the ball around, getting everybody involved really kind of benefits the team throughout the course of a season. So I think that's also part of the factor and why we've seen this offense and Joel specifically look better this year.
Yeah, listen, very, very valid points. It's almost crazy when you think about it because, whether we loved him or hated him when we first got James Harden, we were always star chasing. We always had to get that other guy. And when he did come in the beginning, it was like, wow, we finally got somebody. We finally had this guy. And then he kind of, rescinded back to the old James Harden, and everybody knows, and it just didn't work. And now you get, everybody thought was just kind of like a bogus trade that was just getting trash. But he really did, to quote the great Mark Zumoff, they did turn garbage to gold, because now, I mean, they took a collective unit of pieces that not only role players, but they seem very integral, into this success. And on top of that, this free agent signing Kelly Oubre, who nobody even's talking about. They're 8-0 when those two were going to start line together. That was from StatMuse, but just seeing what he's provided, the energy, he is almost, in my opinion, everything we wanted PJ Tucker to be, that he just wasn't. He just wasn't for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. That's a great point. And all those guys that they brought in, like you said, on paper, it wasn't necessarily overwhelming because you're trading away, obviously a perennial all-star, a future Hall of Famer, a top 75 all-time guy in James Harden. And you're getting back, kind of a bunch of role players and older role players at that. But all the guys that they brought back really fit well, in a Nick Nurse system and alongside the two key guys here in Philly, which obviously is Joel and Tyrese Maxey. You get back versatile wing players, Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, guys that can stretch the floor, that can play a little bit of defense, guard a couple positions, play a couple different positions on offense, and just do the smaller stuff and fit in around, the two huge stars that you have in offensive guys in Joel and Tyrese. And then a lot of it, obviously, too, was just preserving. I think one thing that's it's not getting talked about a ton right now because it's still so early in the season. But moving forward now, we did just cross into 2024, which means that next month will be the trade deadline. And then in the offseason, the Sixers have, I don't know off the top of my head exactly, but they have a ton of cap space, among the highest in the league moving forward. They have almost nobody on the books. And part of the trade was just clearing and preserving that future flexibility, like all the signings, including the Kelly Oubre signing, which to your point has proven to be, one of the bigger steals of the offseason, considering that he's, a 1-year minimum deal that they signed him in, I forget, but I think it was late August, well after all of the other guys signed. And it was kind of at that point where you're like, oh, I kind of forgot this guy is even still out there and available. It was so surprising that, this is a guy that averaged 20 points a game last season. Granted, it was on a really bad Hornets team in Charlotte that not a lot of people paid attention to. But having that kind of firepower to use, he started tonight, like you said, they're 8-0 when he starts, but also when he comes off the bench and can give you that kind of scoring. it's something that they haven't had. But he's on a 1-year deal. All the guys they brought back in that Harden trade are on expiring deals. So a big part of Daryl Morey and the front office's plan was to, try to maximize this season around, Joel still playing at this MVP level, Tyrese Maxey taking a huge step forward. You have an open window now, but you also preserve this window moving forward by having just Joel and Tyrese to move forward with, and then a ton of cap space to kind of try to lure, like you said, star hunting, to borrow Brett Brown's term from back in the day, but to just have all this extra space to potentially lure guys with, either leading up to the trade deadline if a deal presents itself for a player that they want to trade for, that they want to extend, or just in the offseason guys that they could bring in. So there's a lot of financial flexibility that came with that deal, in addition to role players that just fit in really nicely into Nick Nurse's system here.
Yeah, I listen. It's a really good time to be a Sixers fan. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Just number one, you're right. Nobody talks about the Oubre thing, probably because it did happen late. But he's actually, to me, he's like Joel's protector in a sense. He's that gritty guy. He's the garbage guy. But he could do so much more that I never even realized. As far as I didn't know he had that kind of scoring ability when you needed it, and you need people like that. We've never really had that. That's the thing. Even guys like you said, like Nick Batum, who's a really underrated shooter. I mean, he's got such a quick release. I've never seen it before. Like, you obviously have Steph, but Batum can really get it. Here's a guy who, he pondered retirement. And now he felt rejuvenated enough to really stick it out. Morris is another guy, local kid, right? At the later stages of his career. But I mean, he's given them so much. And I think you nailed it. I mean, this is Nick Nurse's MO. I was always a Nick Nurse fan, and he was always a player's coach. And, he does things, again, if anybody listening to not cover, make sure you follow the Blue Coats Beat podcast. I do myself with Coach Joe for the Delaware Blue Coats. And we had Sonny Hill on, and we talked to him about, kind of what Nick Nurse does. And Nick Nurse is at the Delaware Blue Coats game. He's out there, and he's a normal guy. He's not asking to sit up in the suites, or he's a normal guy. And I think that's contagious. Now, you did talk about the trade deadline. So, like, just you as yourself, your own idea of what do you want them to do? Is there somebody out there? You hear Donovan Mitchell's name, Zach LaVine, Anunoby's already been traded now to the Knicks, but is there somebody that you're worth giving up all those assets for, or do you think we roll the dice and just go in the offseason and do what we can do?
See, they're in a nice position because they have the option, if something presents itself, sure, they could jump on it, and they have the cap space to back it up with an extension. Off the names that pop up a lot, obviously, like you just said, Tony, OG is already off the board, headed to New York, although technically he's still going to be a free agent in the offseason, unless he signs an extension. But none of the names to me are worth, at least none of the names that are being commonly mentioned right now. If we're talking, one of the guys from the Bulls, like a Zach LaVine, Alex Caruso, even a DeRozan, like a Pascal Siakam in Toronto, some of those guys. None of those guys to me are really worth giving up a ton for. I don't know how much they really elevate the ceiling of the team this year, but between now and 6 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, when the deadline comes up, there's always some players that end up popping up. And if it's even just smaller moves for the time being that shore up, the roster on the back end, or add, another backup big guy for some matchups where Paul Reed is, a little bit overmatched size wise or something like that. Or if you just bring in another, reliable shooter as a guard spot, or a ball handler off the bench that's not, not a star guy, but just guys that you really shore up the roster. Because the way the East is, and honestly, the league this year is, I mean, on paper right now, the Celtics are probably better than the Sixers in a series. The Bucks would probably give them an issue, but there's not too many teams in the conference that I think that the Sixers and, people watching wouldn't feel pretty confident with the Sixers in. And I don't think you need to overreact and make kind of a splash move just for the sake of doing it, especially when, you're set up good for this year and you have, all this cap space moving forward, like we were talking about for the future. Still have Joel in his late 20s playing, better each year at an MVP level. Tyrese Maxey still probably a couple years away from even getting into his prime as a player, as just a 23-year-old kid first year as like a full-time, ball handler, playmaker for his team. I think the future is still really bright, and you don't want to, necessarily compromise that to overdo a move in the short term. So I guess that's kind of like the long-winded way of saying none of the names right now that have been like floated around to me are worth like giving up some of that space or giving up some of that draft capital. But if one pops up, sure. If not, I think you kind of just make some smaller moves, specifically, another backup guard, another backup big guy, and roll the dice with this season and see, if you can't get farther this year with this roster than you have over the past few seasons.
Yeah, it's kind of the way I feel too. I mean, I like you said, I mean, there's nobody to me that just strikes me as, unfathomable. Like this guy,
Right.
right? And I think that's kind of the way the NBA is right now. And I think that's why it's so important to really blossom your young talent, which I love seeing Tyrese Maxey take it to the next level. Is that enough? I'm not sure. Now, Adam checking in ask a question. He says, do you think they will try to move Tobias at some point, obviously, because he is on the last year of his deal? But I'll tell you what, I'm not a Tobias guy, Mike, but he's actually, I feel like he's played the best we've seen him as a Sixer this year in this offense.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. He is playing well. And Tobias is funny because it's been pretty much any time I've checked in with the front office or like any league sources over the past few years in terms of the Sixers' stance with Tobias Harris in terms of a trade, it's pretty much always the same thing I hear back. And it's basically like they're willing to entertain offers. He's not necessarily on the table, but like if something happened, they would be willing to do it. But at the same time, they're not actively shopping him. They love him in the locker room. They love, still what he brings to the floor as, a third or fourth option on a team. And at this point, it's funny because finally now it's at the point where his contract is somewhat valuable as an expiring deal. Across the league, we've been waiting for this kind of for 5 years to the point where like, hey, maybe we could move off this deal. And I do think that there's, teams that are interested in him across the league right now. I don't think the Sixers are like super eager. And I think it's the same situation. I think that they'll, entertain phone calls. They'll listen to offers and see if there's something they could get done. The stance, I think, kind of remains the same, where they're not looking to take back a lot of salary past this season unless it's a guy that they really want to commit to, which, as of right now, it doesn't seem like there's anyone out there, like we were kind of just saying. But it's something that, like, if one popped up, I think they would be willing to part with Tobias. But if not, I think they're perfectly happy keeping him, in the starting lineup, having him in the locker room and letting that contract, ride out and come off the books this summer and then go from there.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I think this is the first time, and I've always been a very reactionary person. I've always been a very impatient person. I still think, I look at the time when, oh my God, so many years ago, I got killed when I said I would trade Ben Simmons for my God, for Paul George for PG-13. This was like Ben Simmons' second year. Everybody thought I was nuts. I'm like, look, I'm telling you, this dude does not have it. Win now. I always want to win now, but I don't see. I'm actually patient this year. Like I really like what I see, and I look at now that I do a lot of coverage for the Blue Coats, and I see these young guys. You see Ricky Council just going off, and young player, Lofton, young player, right? Tariq, young player. And again, they're all very athletic, and it makes you get excited that possibly we can actually grow a team to be very competitive. Because let me ask you this: what do you think? Not to put you on the spot, but the window for Joel Embiid is, I mean, listen, he is unbelievable, but eventually a guy that big with his knees, his extensive injury history, he's going to hit a wall eventually. What do you think the window is for him to win in this town in Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's fair. And I think, at this point, like you said, he's rounding 30. Next year he'll be 30. Still playing, honestly, the best he's ever played. So I don't think that it's like necessarily something that we're staring down like the end of Joel Embiid's prime or anything like that. But I do think, given that, the size, the potential for injuries moving forward, that it's probably a little bit shorter than, say if he were a guard or, a small forward or something along that nature. But I think Joel has another 3 to 4 years in him where he could be looked at to be the lead guy on a championship team. he's shown no, it's funny because the narrative coming into this season has shifted completely surrounding Joel Embiid. I think a lot of that has to do with the play of Tyrese Maxey and then just how well the team's been overall. But heading into the season, at least nationally, all you would hear is Joel Embiid the next star player that's going to ask for a trade? After this Harden thing, is Joel going to force his way out of town? And even after the trade happened and they didn't get a star player back in the deal, a lot of the reaction pieces that I read online or some, the talk shows on sports were, the Sixers didn't get a star player back. Is Joel going to be frustrated? And is he the next guy out of town? And there was like odds on the Knicks being the next team that he was going to play for. And it was all this conversation heading into the season. And none of it was really about how he was going to follow up the MVP campaign or like how good the Sixers were going to be. And now we're, 2 months later into the season, and the narrative is completely looks like looks like he's going to win his second MVP. Can the Sixers finally get to the conference finals with him and Tyrese Maxey? Is Tyrese Maxey the best number 2 guy he's had in his career, which is a fair question at this point. So it's just funny how much it's shifted. And for anything, internally from Joel, there's never been dissatisfaction on his end. So I don't think, barring things could always change, things could always happen, but he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to be looking for an exit from the city. And I think obviously the team's going to want to keep him around. So I think we still got 3 to 4 more years of him potentially being the main guy here, along with Tyrese, with an open championship window. If, all the cap space that the team has now is spent well.
Yeah, I think listen, I'll be honest with you. I'm one of those guys. I was one of those guys that said, man, I'm telling you, with everything happening with this team, eventually you're going to lose Joel Embiid. He's finally going to say, look, I've given everything and it's just not happening. I still say their best chance to win was with Jimmy Butler. And I hate that didn't happen. That you decided to keep, it's not really to bias. I think people get that, a little confused. Indirectly, they kept Tobias. They didn't choose that. They didn't have a choice. They had to pay somebody. And after Jimmy wasn't here, they paid Tobias. I mean, it's as simple as that. To kind of save face. Joe checking in says, I think people like me appreciate Embiid's regular season stats, not making a huge deal because of their collective underperformance when it matters, which you alluded to. Yeah. You said that. I mean, that's what we all wait for, right?
Yeah, I think that's how it is at this point. I don't think Joe's, unique in that way. A lot of the people that I talk to, they'll appreciate if he goes out and drops 50 because it's a big game. But in general, it's so much of the attitude is just like, let me know when he does it in May. Let me know when he does it in June, which, it's fair. That's the way NBA players are judged. Collectively, it's the way players are judged in this city. And I think it's fair to have a player as clearly great as Joel is. You need those accolades to really cement your case and your legacy. And I think that's really all that's missing. And I don't think, until that happens, I think that is kind of going to be the collective attitude of a lot of people, in the city for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Last one here from Adam, and then we'll try to close it out for you and give you some free time. Adam says, wait, I hit the wrong one. He says, Mike, what is your favorite Embiid moment since you've been covering him?
Oh man, that's a great question, Adam.
That's a loaded question right there. Been so many.
There's so many. So I mean, 3 come to my head immediately, but they all have different connotations. The coolest one, not knowing what was going to transpire immediately after, was Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semis in 2001 against Atlanta when he came out with Triple H. That arena was nuts. That intro was awesome. The kid in me that grew up loving DX and WWF was freaking out. The fact that they went on to get completely spanked in that game, it was so disappointing. Like, it was such a 180 from how hyped that intro was and how nuts the arena felt and all the energy in there to by the third quarter when they're down by like 20 plus to this inferior Hawks team and how they were getting booed off the court. It was just like, but not knowing, like not including the game, that intro was awesome. Seeing him get the MVP award last year was awesome. Obviously before another situation right before Game 6 that ended up being a huge letdown. And then the fight with Karl Anthony Towns, just the random fight in like a November regular season game when Ben Simmons actually ended up having Karl Towns in that headlock and they had the whole back and forth. That was really entertaining that night. That one sticks out.
Yeah, that's great. I forgot about that one. I did not forget about the
That was
Triple H.
probably Ben Simmons' best moment as a Sixer. The Karl Towns headlock. That was
Yes, that's
his
right.
shining moment.
That's the first. That's the first time he actually did anything for us. Probably the last time too,
Yeah.
man. No, listen, no disrespect, but Ben wasn't that guy, man. Adam says he was at the game with Triple H,
Oh
so
yeah,
I
so he
have to
knows,
ask you
man.
that.
It was nuts, and then like
Oh,
it was just so deflating how crazy it was and how hyped that intro was and everything. And he came out with the hammer or
ooh.
the thing, and it was just like, whew. And
Well,
then
it was unexpected, unscripted, like nobody, like it wasn't talked about. There was no leaks, there was no boom, like nobody thought about
and
that. Are
no one
you?
else in the league
Oh,
would do that. Like no one else in the
yeah,
NBA would have it scripted that he would cut. Like Joel is just he's a showman, as
yeah.
much as he's a basketball player. And no one else would have done it. And it's just the fact that it ended up the way it did was just unfortunate for sure.
No, definitely. I will say he is a showman, but I am glad that he decided to kind of back off, on social media and just
Oh yeah, he's
I
matured
think
for sure.
that was him growing up, man. He finally
Yeah,
grew up. That's what it
yeah, he's
was. He
matured
finally
for
grew
sure.
up. Yeah.
Having a kid will do that to you, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When you have a kid, it makes you grow up super, super fast. I have to ask you before you go though. You just mentioned the kidding you with that. Are you still a wrestling fan now?
You know what, Tony? Unfortunately, I'm not. My combat sports fandom has shifted to UFC. So I'm a
Ooh.
big UFC guy, but I do not watch. I don't pay attention to WWE or AEW anymore. Unfortunately.
Hey, listen, man. We all have our thing, right? I'm a huge wrestler. I've never gotten out of it. I love it. We talk about it on the show, but UFC, man, that is. I'll tell you what. That I have a huge respect for those guys, man.
Yeah,
Like,
me too, man. It's crazy.
oh
Even anyone that even gets in there, it doesn't matter what happens. If you get in
nope.
there, props to you because you know, you're doing something. That's crazy.
100%, man. 100%. Again, this is Michael KB at the real Michael K at the real Mike KB on X or Twitter, wherever you want to call it. 97.3 does an unbelievable job covering the 76ers. But Mike, before we get out of here, let everybody know, like, what do you got coming up? I know you're doing stuff every single day. What's coming up for you this week?
Yeah, well, this week we actually got a pretty busy Sixers home slate. I'm at all the home Sixers games, so I just got back actually like 20 minutes ago from that Bulls beatdown that we all just saw at the Wells Fargo Center, taking
Yes.
care of business with Joel back. I think they got the Knicks Friday night and the Jazz Saturday night. I'll be on ESPN 97.3 pre and post game for both of those. I'll probably have some articles up on their website. Like you said, I'm always firing off takes on. I don't call it X. I'm never gonna call it X. So I'm
I
still
mean, yeah,
still riding
I say
strong with
both
Twitter.
just in case because I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Nah, yeah, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't flow off the tongue like
No.
Twitter. So yeah, I mean, if you want to yell at me, tell me I'm dumb, or agree with me at the real Mike KB on Twitter. But yeah, that's about it, man. I appreciate you having me on. It's been fun.
I appreciate it, man. Like I say, I tell you, like I have Chris Franklin coming on in a couple days, and I've told him before. I said, listen, man, to be a beat reporter for not just in this town, but for any team, it's the hardest job in the world. People don't understand the crap that you guys go through and the long hours that you put in, and I highly respect it. I love what you do, and you're very engaging, with the audience. It's fantastic, man. You do a fantastic job. I really appreciate you hopping on me.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it, man. Same to you. It's been fun having me back on sometime.
Yeah. Oh, listen, open invitation, man. Like, I love it. This is something new for me on Monday to Friday, every night, 11 to 1. So, yeah, let's definitely get it together and we'll get you back on as soon as possible.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
All right. Have a great night, Mike. Thank you, man.
Thanks, man. You too.
And there he is. The Michael KB at the real Michael KB, at the real Mike KB. I'm sorry, on Twitter. I'll tell you, man. Like I've said before, this is why I love doing this. Everybody brings on people, right? And you always hear the same people.